Okay, hi everybody. Imogen and I are back for a little chat all about relaxation today. So obviously a lovely topic to talk about and to think about, but we thought we would tackle this particularly at the time of recording this. It is really in the run up to Christmas. We're all going to get a little bit stressed out, a little bit busy. Everything kind of sometimes can get on top of us at this time of the year. So it's always worthwhile thinking about the different ways in which we can relax, and ways which perhaps are going to have other benefits as well to our health at the same time. So welcome, Imogen, again. Imogen's going to start us off today talking perhaps a little bit about the kind of things that she does, maybe perhaps yourself to relax, Imogen, but also the things which you kind of offer in terms of your services for clients, and maybe recommendations that you make in terms of what you do with them and what they can do when they go home to relax.
Yeah. So in terms of like bits and pieces I get to talk through people with in order to relax, a lot of the time it's stuff with which you sort of get the enjoyment from, isn't it? Like that's, I find that's something that's that kind of fulfilling and a bit more sort of like where people think a bit of like the self-care type stuff. That's how I find personally best to unwind. So bits and pieces like I do in my own life and things to kind of help chill out, other than the usual like maybe laying in front of a telly or stuff like this. But it'll be things maybe like I'm a big sucker for a bubble bath.
Yeah.
And I most weeks, not always, but certainly over the winter months, I certainly find that having a bubble bath each week can be really quite good to kind of help just unwind. So that's one thing I personally do. And then in terms of more stuff to do with like what I would actually do and recommend from people in clinic when we're talking about sort of trying to de-stress and mind, is I actually find, I mean, we've sort of mentioned it with the dry needling and stuff before. I actually find the dry needling works really well as a kind of calming on the nervous system.
Yeah.
And I actually have, it's not to hand, I have a spiky pillow, which is like your acupressure mat or your acupressure pillow. So I will actually sometimes, if I'm really finding a quite tense period,
Yeah.
lay on that, and I find that those sort of work really well because it kind of mimics a bit like the dry needling in terms of the way it's stimulating the system and kind of calming everything down. So certainly for people that if I see that and they're coming in and needing they have that sort of like stressed aura around, using the needles can be quite a good way of just being like that moment to be like
Yeah.
generally. The other ones, if people aren't a fan of the dry needling for whatever reason, or just prefer the hands-on touch, is more of that kind of like slower, not actually particularly firm per se, but that slower broader strokes in terms of the massage. So I will sometimes say there, because I tend to feel it up in my neck and shoulders if I'm stressed, is just the gentle like sort of squeezing and massaging sort of motions myself, or like I say with the client, it's just those sort of like more of what I refer to as the de-stress type massage, where it's that kind of like relax and breathe. And one thing I think for which is quite useful for anyone, especially if you're in those moments of sort of stress and need to calm, is that the breath is a big one.
Mm-hmm.
And just using that time to like there's loads of different ways to use the breath to calm it, but even just simply taking those deeper like belly breaths
Yeah.
can be enough just to kind of have that moment to be like, and I'm calming this system down and unwinding.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think all of those things that you've just mentioned, obviously, great reasons why to use any of those things, even including kind of like, your own version of relaxation with the bubble bath, is also putting yourself in a situation where all of those that build up is all kind of what's going on in here. It's the mindset a lot of the time, which obviously impacts the nervous system, and you might feel kind of rising sense of anxiety or stress levels in general, and I'm definitely kind of someone who suffers from that and will allow kind of build up to a certain point and then realize actually I need to kind of bring my nervous system down. And I would use all of those things for like general relaxation, so a bit like with a bubble bath, it is kind of nice obviously to be in a warm bubble bath, but also knowing that it's going to be kind of relaxing muscles, it's going to be good for kind of recovery on that side of things, particularly if you're someone who does a lot of exercise and training. That is going to be great for kind of recovery, but also putting yourself in a bit like with the dry needling or the mat that you said, or pillow, about lying on those. It's almost taking your mind off of what's going on in here, changing your mindset, because you're just then having to focus on that one thing. Now, I actually find those pillows really quite challenging to lie on or to stand on, but actually putting yourself in that position allows you to be focusing on that one thing. You're concentrating on just that, and it allows you to take off all of those other kind of thoughts that are perhaps going around and around in your mind, consistently. And that is very similar to how I would use strength training myself, so the moment I walk through those gym doors, and I've got that hour to myself, I'm focused on a set training plan, specific exercises, certain ways to do them. And that's the only thing that I'm thinking about during that time. So for me, again, that's a real kind of stress release. That's how I use exercise, to actually de-stress, to bring my nervous system down. Lots of people might think about exercise as perhaps something that ramps up your nervous system. But obviously, yes, perhaps if you're going into something that's high cardio or high intensity exercise, possibly so. But again, even in those situations, you're focusing on that one particular thing. It allows you that time just to kind of deload everything else, and actually just kind of focus on what you're doing for a set period of time, which just allows that time for other things to kind of settle, like, as I say, kind of anxiety, whatever it might be, to bring that down. So I think that's another great way to think about some of these kind of healthier things for not just your well-being, but again, it's going to be beneficial if you're kind of actually using something like exercise or strength training.
Well, it doesn't even, I mean, like I like you do use running for that same purpose, but for like, and I know quite a few runners that will say the same thing, that they really feel that stress because it is quite a calming, whether it's the repetitiveness of it or whether it, like you're focusing on the sort of the task at hand. But it doesn't even necessarily need to be an intense activity like that, does it? I mean, even just, that's why people say going out for a walk.
Yes.
It's still that sort of like, you're out, you're being able to observe what's around you, are you sort of mapping out where you're walking to, or whatever it may be, how you're focusing on. Or it could be that you're just listening to music or whatever, but it's being present, isn't it? It's not letting yourself kind of spiral down the what ifs and, oh, I've got to do this and what if that and then this and blah, blah, blah. It's just focusing on now.
100%. And that is a key kind of thing to mention, really. It's bringing yourself back to the present moment. Lots of people will either be worrying about things because they're living in the past of what's happened, worrying about that, what impact it's had on this, that and the other, or they're living in the future, worrying too much about things that are going to happen or might happen. And it's about bringing yourself back to that kind of present moment. And all of those things that we've mentioned obviously are really beneficial for that. But also, obviously, you said about the breathing side of things, so whether it's kind of full on kind of meditation or just general bringing yourself back to your breath. It doesn't necessarily, you'll have lots of different options out there in terms of how you breathe, how long you might hold your breath for, how long you kind of exhale or inhale for. But it's not necessarily, again, those things are great because they'll give you a focus if that's what works for you. But it literally could be as simple as, don't worry about how quick you're breathing, whatever, it's just about thinking about, almost just listening to your breath, just thinking about focusing on that one thing. It just brings you back to that present moment, and you're just thinking about your breathing, and you're just listening to it, and you're just being there, like you say, in that kind of moment. And studies show that just doing that for even just really short periods of time, it could be like 30 seconds, that is enough to start bringing your whole kind of system down in terms of whether it is anxiety or that nervous, high level of kind of nervous state that you're in. Short little bursts, and that that's a great tool if you can kind of remember that throughout your day. Even if you've got a super busy day, you've barely got time to go, you feel like you've barely got time to kind of stop, as we do sometimes, but just taking that really short, 30 seconds, I'm just going to bring myself back to that moment, just by maybe even close your eyes, breathing for 30 seconds, listening to your breath, thinking about your breath. It's just going to kind of help you with that little reset, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, there's loads of tools that you can have. Like, I mean, I've had anxiety issues in the past, so I've been given a whole armor of the bits and pieces like this. Because even if it's like, if breath isn't one for you, another one that's quite useful for people is if with using the hands. So you can do it. So either with like, if you're going away, if you've been to the toilet and you're washing your hands, so the time when you're washing in soap, is just pay attention to the sensation of you rubbing the soap in and washing your hands and stuff.
Mm.
Like that's something we do a lot of the time, and you can pay attention to. Or if you're not, if you use hand cream, it's the same. Like you can, when you're putting in and applying hand cream, just paying attention to what you're feeling and that sort of like massaging it in motion by just focusing on sensation like that. Can be a really, again, it's a quick task, but
Yeah.
can just be enough of an effect to break that thought spiral.
Yeah, and there are actually a couple. I mean, I know we might be delving into another topic, which I know that we do aim to kind of cover in the future, which is self-massage, and how that might be beneficial as well. We can cover that perhaps in a bit more detail in another session. But just in terms of a very similar idea to what you're saying, there are some really lovely kind of points on your hands and wrists that actually, again, it's just because not necessarily just the area that you're touching, but actually. Because they are, you can focus on one particular thing and you're just thinking about doing that one thing. So one really nice area is this kind of, obviously you've got a slightly bit more kind of a muscly area just underneath your thumb there. Again, kind of just kind of pressing any kind of, again, if you've got any tension through those hands, lots of people kind of sitting there kind of typing at desks and using their hands for things in set positions, perhaps contracted a little bit more. So again, you can kind of use fingers or even your other thumb to kind of press into that area, hold down, a bit like trigger point therapy, where you're just kind of pressing in, allowing a little bit of time for release, and then kind of moving it around that area. Again, you might find areas that are perhaps slightly more tender than others, which actually you find the longer you hold there, the more actually that feels quite good to you. And also similarly, areas here, so probably about a thumb's width away from the edge of your hand there onto your wrist, again, kind of where, like the kind of pulse points that we might use as well. Again, just adding a little bit of pressure, whether it's through finger or thumb, and just adding a little bit of pressure there. Again, some people find that they get kind of a really nice release, just starts to kind of calm that nervous system down a little bit. And again, you're just focusing on one thing, and again, it could be 30 seconds, just holding it there. And then you might just, again, it might not be anything to do with actually how it feels, what you're touching. It's just you focusing on something and allowing your kind of mind to just shut down on everything else for that really short period of time, which I think, if you haven't tried it before, even if you think, oh, that's not going to, it's not something that I would normally do, it's not going to work for me, I definitely recommend just trying some of those little tips and just seeing, if actually it does help. Because I was definitely someone who didn't use many of those things up until the last few years, and the more I've kind of just tried different things out, it allows me a little kind of toolbox of things which actually, if I think, right, I can feel things escalating, I feel like it's building, and then I can just do something for 30 seconds, and that will be kind of really beneficial just to bring everything down, and also just resets your mind again.
Yeah.
Again, if you've been super busy, and actually sometimes we can become really kind of unproductive, can't we? We want to be productive, we want to be efficient with our time, want to get as much done as possible sometimes, but sometimes when you're trying to multitask and you've got loads and loads of things going on at one time, actually you end up becoming a bit less productive because everything's just kind of seeming a bit overwhelming. So again, if you can kind of just kind of shut that down for a really short period of time, sometimes actually helps you to then refocus.
Yeah, it just helps reset, isn't it, when it becomes a bit too overstimulated.
Yeah, absolutely. So I hope that actually that some people will just, even if it's just take one or two of these little tips away with them as we get into this busy festive season. But if we what we'll try and do perhaps on our next session is to tackle the self massage, because again, that is another one of those tools that, you know, again, you can do quite simply on your own, small little areas that you can actually reach. And then there's a few little tools which I know both of us kind of use, that aren't just kind of using your own hands, other things that you might have at home that you could use, where you can use it with another bit of furniture or on the floor or against the wall, that kind of thing. And that again can provide some amazing relief, particularly those people who get particularly tight shoulders and neck areas and things like that. When you are distressed, everything just goes a bit like that, doesn't it? So it's just ways in which you can kind of release it a little bit. So we'll try and tackle that perhaps a little bit more on the next session. Okay, right, lovely. Thank you so much for joining us for this little one on relaxation, and we'll see you again soon. Bye.